The sky above Aquilus had never looked so furious. Bulging storm clouds churned like a malevolent sea, and sheets of rain fell in torrents that turned the city's polished walkways into rushing rivers of murky water. Myra Zevran pressed her back against a collapsing railing as a blast of wind nearly swept her off the narrow sky bridge. Lightning forked across the heavens, illuminating the submerged lower districts in flickers of electric white. At 15, Myra was small for her age-slight of frame, with ink-black hair plastered to her face by the relentless rain. Yet what she lacked in stature, she more than made up for in determination. Ever since her younger brother disappeared in last year's reef dive accident, her life had become defined by urgency, the desperate urge to save someone, anything, from the capricious elements. She lurched forward, guided by the distant wail of collapsing metal. A section of the western floodgate, crippled by the stress of unrelenting waves, had buckled. Water had breached the walls in a roaring surge, cascading down through the observation decks like a punishing waterfall. From somewhere beneath the chaos came a sound that stopped Myra mid-stride, a low, pained cry that reverberated through her bones. Heart-pounding, Myra scrambled down a half-submerged maintenance ladder. Every rung groaned under her weight, threatening to tear free and hurl her into the floodwaters. Below, the corridor stretched into blackness, save for occasional sparks, where the city's power conduits had shorted out. She clicked on the micro-lantern at her belt. Its soft glow revealed a trail of liquid silver slithering across the floor. Then she saw it, a small limp form beneath a twisted support beam, caught halfway between the rising water and the cavernous void beyond. The creature was about the size of a puppy, its wings folded tightly against flanks that glimmered like polished steel. One eye cracked open, a molten ember set in a body of shadow, and it let out another choked hiss. "Hold on," Myra whispered, swallowing her fear. She dropped her satchel of medical supplies beside her and pressed her hands against the beam. Her muscles quivered as she heaved, but the steel yielded an inch at a time. Each breath felt like inhaling stinging salt water. When at last the beam shifted enough for her to slide beneath, she froze at the sight of the hatchling's singed scales and heaving chest. The water rose around them, already at knee level. The corridor's exit was blocked by debris. If she didn't act fast, both would drown. Through the downpour's roar, she heard it, the metallic crack of another beam succumbing. With no life raft to spare, she yanked the hatchling into her arms, its weight far heavier than its size suggested, and clambered onto the largest fragment of floating wreckage she could find. A massive wave thundered through the corridor, nearly sweeping her from her precarious perch. Instinctively, she wrapped the hatchling in her raincoat, pressing its head against her shoulder. Its claws scraped her wrist, but instead of pain, she felt a searing warmth spread through her arm, as if the creature's life force were trying to fuse with her own. In that instant, everything else fell away. The storm, the collapse, the city swallowed by water. There was only the heat of the hatchling's grip and the certainty that they belonged together. Above, rescue sirens wailed in the distance, but their echo was faint over the roar of the flood. Myra's teeth chattered as the water crept higher. Around her waist, she spotted a narrow maintenance shaft, a slim escape route leading back to the main atrium. With trembling arms, she hauled herself and the hatchling into the shaft's grate. Sharp edges bit into her palms, but she barely noticed. Moments later, she emerged into the atrium, gasping for breath. Rescue drones sensitive to heartbeat signatures drifted overhead, scanning the waterlogged ruins. One hovered close, its mechanical arm extending. Myra locked eyes with it and waved frantically, the hatchling's neon eye reflecting in her tear-streaked face. The drone's sensors recognized two distinct pulses, one human, one something else. As the arm scooped them both to safety, The hatchling uncurled, raising its head. Ink-black pupils swirled with molten silver as it met Myra's gaze. She felt a quick surge of courage. The same fierce determination that had driven her here now steadied her heart. When the hatchling stretched its neck forward and lightly tapped her cheek with its snout, she understood without words. It would never forget this rescue. On the deck above, the city's engineers worked to seal the breach. Myra, wrapped in a thermal blanket, cradled the hatchling against her chest. It nestled into her embrace, letting out a soft, radiant chirp that pulsed against her ribs like a heartbeat. Around them, Aqualis's citizens cheered the rescue teams, but Myra's world had narrowed to this single shining creature. In the gathering dusk, as the floodwaters slowly retreated, she gave the hatchling a name. Aaron. Silver sky in the old tongue and oath whispered in awe at the life she had saved and the unknown journey that awaited them both. Ask ChatGPT. The sun rose softly over the reclaimed spires of Odysseys, painting the slick decks of the Zevran research vessel in hues of rose and gold. Myra Zevran, barely more than a child when she first found Aaron, now stood at the bow in the early hours, her dark hair braided tightly against the breeze. 15 years had passed since the flood, yet every glance at the horizon reminded her of that night of tempest and terror. Beside her, perched on a reinforced support beam, was a Reen no longer puppy-sized, but a creature of immense, graceful power. Under the careful watch of Dr. Leora Vance, the ship's xenozoologist Aaron had developed beyond any known record. For his species, assuming, of course, dragons were supposed to follow predictable patterns at all. His elongated neck was ringed with faint violet markings. Each scale on his flank caught the dawnlight and broke it into prismatic glimmers. Behind him, Myra's father, Captain Darius Zevran, barked orders to the deckhands as they prepared the vessel for another day of oceanic surveys. First light readings today. Daughter, her father called without turning. I want your analysis. On the plankton bloom by midday. Myra nodded, slipping off the beam and unholstering her datapad. She glanced up at Aaron, whose bright, opaline eyes followed her movement. He gave a soft, rumbling hum of recognition, a sound more melodic. Then a growl, low and resonant like a tuning gong. After the engineers powered up the submersible drones, Myra and Dr. Vance descended to the lab. The room buzzed with servo motors and holographic displays, but Aaron chose to remain on deck. Tiny whirls of condensation drifted from his nostrils as he watched the lab's glass viewport, curious but restrained. Look at these readings, Dr. Vance said as they entered. A bloom of Aureli's plankton, the first we've seen since before the flood. She tapped a floating hologram, and a swarm of bioluminescent organisms glowed in midair. If this continues, it could help replenish the coastal fisheries. Myra's heart lifted. That's good news for the people and for the reefs. She frowned, scrolling through last night's temperature logs. But salinity levels are dropping faster than anticipated. We'll need to adjust the desalination intake on the south rig. Dr. Vance smiled. And I'll make sure Aaron stays out of trouble while you're down here. She winked, and Myra returned the gesture, the four nodding and heading back up. On deck, the chiming of the ship's bells signaled the start of the training session. Captain Zevran's custom rigging, thick cables threaded between the masts, formed a makeshift flight corridor. Myra secured her leather harness and clipped on a tether line. Aaron flexed his newly grown wing joints and flared his sails wide. Ready? Myra called, her voice steady despite the flutter in her chest. With a single flutter, Aaron lifted, the tether line holding him just above deck level. At his signal, a low trill that echoed in her bones, Myra activated her line, and they both sailed forward, dragon and human in synchronized descent. The morning wind carried them over the rolling waves, the deck falling away until the world was nothing but endless blue beneath the pale sky. Aaron banked sharply at her whispered command. drilling through the air with such ferocity that spray exploded off his wingtips like a celestial storm. Myra gripped his scaled ridges, her laugh carried along by the rush of wind. Below, crew members paused to watch the spectacle. They had seen Aaron grow from that fragile hatchling, but nothing compared to this majestic display of trust. When the training ended, Aaron landed so gently that Myra barely felt the impact. She unhooked her tether and leaned down to brush his snout with her fingertips. A soft plume of vapor bloomed between them, and she breathed it in with a grin. "Almost time for your next growth cycle," she murmured. "I'll prepare more of the Vance synthesis serum, just a few adjustments, and you'll reach your full wingspan." Aaron's golden eyes glimmered as he let out a cheerful chirp, nuzzling her hand. In that simple gesture lay years of shared triumphs. The fearsome storm that first brought them together, the countless nights spent monitoring his vitals, the whispered lullabies she'd sing when he couldn't sleep. He was more than a companion, he was her family. That evening, with the lamps dimmed and the sea calm, Myra led Aaron to the aft deck beneath a silvered moon. The lantern's glow danced across his iridescent scales, turning him into a constellation made flesh. She knelt beside him, gently tracing the intricate pattern along his flank, a tapestry of violet veins shimmering beneath pearlescent armor. "You saved me," she whispered, voice trembling with emotion. "And I'll always protect you, no matter what storms come." She pressed her forehead to the warm curve of his jaw. For a heartbeat, the world held its breath. Then Aaron exhaled a single, radiant ember that blossomed into a cascade of tiny sparks, silver motes drifting upward like stars set free. The warmth settled in Myra's chest, and she closed her eyes, storing the moment in her heart. Above them, clouds scuttled across the moon, but beneath that fleeting cover of darkness, two souls made a silent vow, one of loyalty, one of love. And though neither could know the trials that lay beyond the horizon, they faced the future as one, bound by a promise as enduring as dragonfire under silver light. 10 years had passed since the flood, and 5 since Aaron's first molt into his adult plumage. In that time, Myra, now 25, had grown into her role as Aaron's rider and companion, while her reputation as an expert navigator and biologist spread across the coastal leagues. Yet even as the Zevran vessel charted new currents and studied resurgent reefs, dark portents rippled through the sea-lanes. It began with rumors, half-heard whispers in dockside taverns of ships vanishing beneath columns of black smoke, of entire fishing flotillas turned to ash by dragons not their own. By the time the Zevran crew reached the Exarch Islands, a string of atolls once known for peaceful trade, the warning flags were already flying. Governors huddled behind sealed doors, their eyes darting to the horizon. That afternoon, while Myra conducted plankton sampling aboard a ramshackle platform, Dr. Vance burst into her lab with a datapad, so shaken her fingers trembled. "Myra," she panted, "multiple sensor arrays have picked up a fleet and armada 500 strong bearing the sigil of the draconic sovereignty." She tapped a glowing map, dozens of arrowheads advancing like a dark tide toward Aquilis. "These patterns, they're moving faster than any conventional ship." Myra's breath caught. Ever since the sovereignty's fall a millennium ago, scholars had debated whether their dragon-mounted warhost had truly vanished or merely gone to ground. If these were indeed their banners of ebony and crimson, the world teetered on the brink of catastrophe. "Can the Zevran outrun them?" she asked, voice calm even as her heart raced. Dr. Vance shook her head. "No survey vessel in the fleet can outpace a sovereign cruiser, let alone their draconic escorts." That evening, the Council of Intralis convened aboard the massive Sky Dome, its glass panels lit by emergency floodlights. Captain Zevran sat at the head, flanked by engineers and diplomats. From the great viewport behind them, the setting sun glowed like a warning ember on the horizon. When the doors opened, A single figure strode in, an obsidian-scaled dragon whose wings blocked the light, its rider cloaked in flowing robes adorned with living flame. A hush fell. The rider dismounted, and the dragon's voice rumbled through. "The chamber. Return the creature born of human mercy, or witness your civilization drown in dragonfire." Mira's blood ran cold. This emissary, Commander Valeth, was legendary for both strategic brilliance and ruthless ambition. She stepped forward, Aren's name trembling on her lips, but her father held up a hand. "We will not betray a bond forged in life and death." Valeth's golden eyes flashed. "Then prepare your world for extinction." With a thrust of his wrist, the dragon unfurled its wings. In the sky above, the augury of war took shape. As sovereignty cruisers darkened the horizon, back in her quarters, Mira stared at the tiny crystal scale Aren had shed that spring, a reminder of his constant growth. She ran her thumb along its iridescent surface, seeking guidance in its shifting hues. Below, the ship's hull thrummed with the hum of awakened engines and the distant roar of rising dragons. Aren curled around her shoulders, his warm breath. Against her neck, a single question. How would she protect him and the world they loved from an empire born of vengeance? Mira closed her eyes against the new darkness settling over the sea. "We'll face them together," she whispered, pressing her hand to his scaled crest. Beyond the porthole, the first salvo of sovereignty scouts pierced the twilight flames, sketching angry patterns across the sky. And so, as the shadow of war stretched its wings over every shore, Mira and Aren steeled themselves for a battle that would test the very promise they had made beneath silver light. Dawn broke in sheets of molten gold, setting the restless sea ablaze. A crimson haze lingered on the horizon where sovereignty cruisers' sleek black hulls, emblazoned with dragon wing sigils, advanced in perfect formation. On the deck of the Zevran flagship, Myra tightened her harness, every muscle coiled like a spring. Around her, the crew braced against the pitch of the waves and the thunderous beats of armored drakes overhead. "Positions," Captain Zivran's voice carried over the din. "Rangers to the bow scatter charges into their prow-flight crews. Prepare intercept." The ship shuddered as the first salvo of draconic fire streaked toward them, scorching the rigging and sending sparks cascading into the surf. Aren reared beside Mira, his obsidian scales glinting with violet veins as he inhaled sharply. His wings unfurled, each feathered membrane spanning nearly 20 meters, the air trembling at his power. "Hold fast," Myra murmured, placing a steadying hand on his crest. "We have one shot at this." Below deck, the hydrodynamic torpedo tubes hummed alive, ready to launch a barrage of sonic disruptors designed to shatter enemy formations. But to breach the Sovereignty flagship's reinforced hull, they would need more than explosives. They needed to disrupt its command. High above, Commander Valeth's obsidian drake loomed like a living fortress. His booming challenge echoed across the waves. "Dragonborn, surrender the rebel and kneel before the true sovereign Empress." The Sovereignty fleet's horns sounded in unison, a deafening war chant that sent shivers through every mariner's spine. "Now, Aren!" Myra cried and leapt. Arms locked tight around his scaled neck, she shouted commands to her flight team. Aren dove, hurling himself through the gap between two cruisers. Below, the hydrolances opened fire, piercing the lead ship's engine shields with concussive blasts. The Sovereignty flagship rocked, its metal plating fracturing under the onslaught. Seizing the moment, Aren arched upward in a blistering climb. Mira thrust her arm forward, releasing the modified disruptor mines. They clung to the cruiser's hull like barnacles before detonating in a cascade of blue fire that sent shockwaves through the Sovereignty ranks. A roar of triumph rose from the Zevran crew, but it was short-lived. From the depths, a ripple of water erupted, and the sea itself seemed to part. Dozens of colossal dragons, each with scales that shimmered like living constellations, emerged in formation, their wings beating in unison like a thunderstorm made flesh. Myra gasped. These were the ancient lineages thought extinct, galactic scale worms of the deep, born in oceanic trenches and nourished by Earth's molten heart. Their arrival fractured the sovereignty's resolve. One by one, enemy drakes faltered, their flames sputtering out as they laid down their battle standards. Aaron roared, an earth-shaking call that resonated in every heart. Mira leaned forward, her voice rising over the tumult. By the bond of mercy and fire, I claim the legacy of the Empress. The ancient dragons bowed their colossal heads, wings folding in reverent arcs. On deck, the sovereignty's human commanders abandoned their weapons, knees sinking into the planking. Commander Valeth dismounted his drake, approaching Mira with ragged dignity. You wield the ancient title, he breathed, awe and defeat warring in his eyes. Myra met his gaze, the weight of her ancestors in her steady calm. I am Empress Myra of the United Draconic Realms, she declared, voice strong enough to carry to every corner of the battlefield. And as long as mercy guides us, no shadow shall again rise to threaten our world. A cheer erupted from both dragon and human alike, the sea itself trembling in celebration. Aaron nudged Mira's shoulder, scales warm against her cheek. Together, they stood at the bow ruler and companion overlooking a world reborn in unity. As the last sovereignty cruiser limped away, trailing wisps of defeated smoke, Aaron spread his wings and lifted Myra into the dawn wind. Below, the fleet of star drakes saluted with synchronized beats that echoed like a victory hymn. And so the prophecy was fulfilled. The girl who saved a dragon hatchling in a flood rose, 15 years later, to claim her destiny. Empress of dragons, guardian of the seas, and herald of a new age, Myra Zevran soared skyward, her silver crown catching the first light of peace.